Grief. Holy hell, is that a powerful thing, especially when you pair it with a very hyper-focused, blistering rage. Could cause a regular old law-abiding citizen to go off the rails and go to unfathomable lengths to seek retribution. On Halloween night 1984, Doreen Herbert, who was home with her 4-year-old daughter and also pregnant with a baby boy, was just handing out Halloween candy and heard a very loud series of knocks on the door. When she opened the door, she knew straight away that this was no big kid. This was a fully grown man in a wolf mask carrying a giant machete. I mean, this shit was straight out of a horror movie. He said, "I'm gonna kill you." She quickly realized this was no stranger at all. In fact, she knew exactly who this was. That's when she tells her daughter to go hide. Doreen's husband Charles, who had only been gone for, by his account, no more than about 15 minutes to run to the liquor store, comes home to find the door unlocked. And when he walks inside, his life basically crumbles right in front of him. He would walk into one of the most disturbing and violent crime scenes you could ever imagine. People that knew Doreen described her as being very friendly, giving, outgoing, and that's probably what led her to pursue the career that she did, which was physical therapy. She wanted to help people. Now, William Michael Dennis, who went by Mike or Michael, I'm just going to call him Mike for ease. He worked as a sprayer at a factory that was basically right next door to where Doreen worked, and before long, some of their mutual friends set them up on a blind date, and they hit it off. This was definitely one of those opposites attract type deals, where Doreen was super, outgoing and bubbly. Mike was more quiet. He was partially deaf in one ear, and back in those days, if you needed a hearing aid, you had to carry around this big annoying chunk. So he's insecure about the chunk. He's got a stutter due to the hearing impairment. Socially, he didn't excel. He also hadn't really had a lot of luck or experience with the females, hadn't really been able to ever hold down a girlfriend, so when Doreen came into his life, he hung on to her like grim death. Immediately, he was just like, "I fucking love you." They end up marrying real quick and having a son who they named Paul. Mike was really ecstatic about being a father. His son was everything to him. But during the first year of them being parents, their relationship started to deteriorate. They were struggling as new parents, but also Doreen was kind of just getting worn down with Mike's generally rather gloomy and soul-sucking nature. Mike was definitely, pretty sad that he lost the one woman who gave him a chance. And on top of that, Doreen was also granted primary custody, which he was not thrilled about, but he tried his best to make it work. Mike moved really close, like only separated by a few houses, and he would come see his son on the weekends, and he lived for that time with his son. That was really the only thing he actually truly enjoyed in life. Sure, he lost his woman, but at least he had his son. Now, Doreen, on the other hand, her rebound game was strong. Before she knew it, she was pulled off to the side of the road with a flat tire, and all of a sudden, this carpet store owner named Charles Herbert pulls up, gets the car up and running again, and gets a number. And they hit it off pretty much straight away. They get married, and they have a baby girl. Now, here's where it all goes downhill, my friends. One day, Doreen is at the house by herself. Charles must have been at work or something, and her son Paul is playing outside with his ball. She had a momentary lapse of concentration, and then looks back out the window and doesn't see Paul. And when she goes to check on him outside, she discovers him in the family pool. They actually had a fence around the pool, but there was a small opening. I think their dog had dug a hole under it or something, and Paul had climbed under there, gone into the pool, and drowned. Michael, upon hearing this information, was wrecked. Where everything else just kinda sucked in his life, at least he had his son who was everything to him, and now he didn't know what to do, but he did know that he was pissed. He thought, how could something like this even happen? And he eventually starts to believe that it was done intentionally to rid him from Doreen's and Charles's new life together. He ends up filing a wrongful death lawsuit against Doreen and Charles, and they go back and forth for like a couple years. Like, this is a lengthy process, and he ends up losing that as well. And that kicks off the downward spiral. Over the next couple of years after the trial is all done, Mike's life takes a dive. He loses his job as a sprayer, and he just goes into a deep, dark depression, and he keeps going over it in his head with his crazy theories as to, how and why. So while Mike's life is basically imploding in on itself, Doreen and Charles, they end up having 2 miscarriages, but then they get pregnant with another boy who was due in early November just after Halloween. It was obviously a very happy moment for them, but Mike, upon hearing this, went into an all-out fury. Of course, Mike still lived only a few houses down from Charles and Doreen, and quickly the news of her pregnancy and that she was pregnant with a boy spread throughout the neighborhood, and as the date approached, he could also see her in her pregnant state. Mike had now had a good 4 years to mull over all his deranged speculations and theories in his head, but now the conclusion that he'd come to is that now that Charles and Doreen had removed his gene pool from their new family, they were restarting and replacing Paul with a new boy. Now back to Halloween night 1984. Charles walks into his home and sees his wife Doreen lying in a 1-inch pool of blood, hacked from head to toe. Her left hand had been completely severed off, and their unborn baby had been removed and chopped. That is an actual quote. It's cut into multiple pieces. There was so much blood that Charles ends up slipping and falling into the blood, and he starts trying to stop the bleeding. Surprisingly, Doreen actually still had a pulse until she was taken into the ambulance and she died on the way to the hospital. Now, we all know the cops go for the most readily available and common suspect, which is the spouse, and when they took a look at Charles, he was covered in blood and he smelt of alcohol he'd been drinking earlier that night. He made for a pretty damn good suspect. So they were keeping an eye on him. He was pleading to go join his wife in the ambulance, and they were like, no, you got to stay here. They couldn't let a potential suspect go into the ambulance with, a murder victim. When investigators walked into the house, they saw a pumpkin covered in blood spatter. The scene was so unbelievably violent that they had to have been thinking, well, this seems personal. Clearly overkill. And they could tell that the blood pattern on the walls and stuff, it wasn't just from like a knife or something or from stabbing, it was from a slashing or a hacking weapon like a machete. There were even puncture marks up on the ceiling from, the pulling back. Police also find maybe the most significant piece of evidence yet, the infamous wolf mask lying outside the house. They interviewed the 4-year-old daughter, Deanna. She told them the story about this man coming to the door in a wolf mask and her mom telling her to hide, so she hid behind the couch and she was not attacked. And in this way, the angle of looking at Charles does seem a little bit odd to them, a husband putting on a wolf mask and surprise attacking his own wife. It was a little perplexing, but again, Charles made for a good suspect initially. But there wasn't a whole lot of really useful evidence at the scene. The only other thing that they had was they found a blood trail that led all the way down the block, but eventually the blood drops stop. So they take Charles in for questioning and they start finding out more about their relationship. But then some more investigators, while he's being interviewed, start talking to some of the neighbors. And one neighbor in particular tells them that Doreen had lost a child 4 years ago. Tells them all about the little wrongful death lawsuit. So after a while, police were like, okay, Charles, you can go. Let's direct our attention to this guy, William Michael Dennis. As soon as they pay Mike a visit, red flags start popping up everywhere. They shine a flashlight in his truck that's parked in his driveway, and they see blood on the steering wheel. When they knocked on his door, they could hear running water, and they took a wild guess that he wasn't doing the dishes. He didn't come right away, so they knock again a little bit louder, and then he comes to the door in a robe. They tell him about his ex-wife's murder that had just happened, and he was basically like, oh, that's unfortunate. I wonder who could have done that. Unnervingly unfazed by the information that had just entered his ear holes. They come in and start looking around, and they ask him to provide his ID, and he starts getting all wishy-washy about it. Oh, I know I have it, but I don't really know where it is. Oh, maybe it's over here behind the headboard. And he starts walking over there. And the cops automatically sees that and is like, okay, yeah, no, stop. Don't go over there. Then all of a sudden they see his right hand. I guess he was maybe hiding it in the robe or something, and he brings it up to his face, and it's all bandaged up. Then they see that his wallet with his ID in it is just lying out there on the dresser. They were like, why is your hand covered in bandages? And he was like, oh, I was just playing with a knife, as one does. As they bring him in for questioning, they start just tearing his house apart for evidence. They find a .357 Magnum, guess where? Behind the headboard of his bed. So he was probably going back and forth. Do I have a shootout with the cops? Do I do myself in? He was obviously planning something with that. They also found some blood around the kitchen sink. There was more bloody bandages, and bloody clothes. But the most eerie discovery of all came in the garage. The whole wolf mask with the machete thing, yeah, that was actually his plan B. They found 2 handmade coffins, one was slightly longer than the other. The dimensions appeared to have been made to fit Charles and Doreen. They also found 2 body bags, weights, and maps of the San Francisco Bay. He was really going to try and bring everything full circle in his mind. You know, he was going to drop them in the ocean and drown them just as his son had been drowned 4 years earlier. They also found a receipt for an 18-inch machete and a sleeve for a machete, but no machete. They actually went and bought the machete and took it back to the crime scene, and it matched those puncture marks in the ceiling. Now, they end up arresting him, but after holding him for 48 hours, they actually have to let him go due to insufficient evidence. They had been waiting on blood test results from Doreen's home and Mike's home, and there was a delay in the testing. Awesome. Imagine being the cops and knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the man responsible for that kind of a crime, and you just gotta turn him back out on the street. But they needed more, and they did get their smoking gun. A woman tells police that she attended a Halloween party the previous year with Michael Dennis, and guess what he was wearing? The wolf mask. She even had a picture. And on top of that, the blood analysis team got their asses in gear and turned back a match. Blood found at Doreen's home that matched Mike's blood type, and blood found at Mike's house that matched Doreen's blood type. Mike is now 71 and has remained on death row ever since his conviction. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for watching my first YouTube video. I'm really excited to try and work on some more long form videos. Been wanting to get into the YouTube game for a long time, so whether you just stumbled across this page on YouTube or you've come over from TikTok, thank you so much for all the support. But yeah, I'll see you next time.